The U.S. would take Alberta and Saskatchewan and leave the rest of Canada to fend for itself. And here's where things get really interesting.
Meanwhile, people are signing a petition saying, why not be the 51st state?
And I was more than happy to leave.
That's very good.
I think there is a strong separatist sentiment in Saskatchewan, much like there is here in Alberta.
Saskatchewan just dropped a massive bombshell. Frustration with Ottawa is boiling over, and the idea of breaking away from Canada is back on the table. Some voices are even talking about joining the U.S. As the 51st state, like Alberta, it's been ignored, drained, and dismissed for far too long. It trades more with the U.S. than with Canada, faces federal punishment for being productive, and now it's laying the legal groundwork to leave. No permission needed.
Alberta and Saskatchewan are already more connected to the U.S. than to the rest of Canada. Alberta is Canada's Texas.
On June 18, 2025, while half the country was busy pretending everything's fine, Saskatchewan walked into Lloydminster and basically said, "We're out." And no, this wasn't just some polite handshake with Alberta and a few recycled complaints about Ottawa. This was the first time in Canadian history that Saskatchewan sat down as an equal, made its case without Alberta's shadow, and made it very clear it's not asking permission anymore.
Alberta and Saskatchewan, maybe they've had enough. Western alienation isn't new. For decades, these provinces have felt ignored, overtaxed, underrepresented.
This joint caucus meeting, it wasn't for optics. It was a shot across the bow. Because Saskatchewan's tired of carrying Canada's natural resource wealth on its back, only to get slapped in the face with regulations and bureaucracy. The province now produces nearly half of Canada's oil, shares that 75% oil production dominance with Alberta, and is a global player in uranium, agriculture, and potash.
Saskatchewan, one of the world's top agricultural powerhouses. It exports wheat, potash, and uranium.
That's not small potatoes, that's backbone of the economy material. But where's the recognition? Where's the freedom to manage its own damn resources without a stack of federal roadblocks taller than a grain silo? Let's talk about equalization. While Alberta's $250 billion overpayment gets all the media love, Saskatchewan's quietly getting bled too. Its wealth disappears into Ottawa's pockets while its projects stall out in layers of federal nonsense.
Alberta is Canada's Texas. Rich in oil and gas, fiercely independent, and constantly at war with Ottawa over energy policies.
The province brings in billions, feeds the country, fuels half of it, and still gets treated like a rebellious teenager. Equalization isn't equal. It's economic punishment for being productive. And Saskatchewan knows it. This isn't just another Twitter trend or Facebook group ranting about the good old days. The separation movement is now formal. It's organized. It's real. Saskatchewan is not just thinking about sovereignty. It's making paperwork happen.
Their economies don't just rely on American markets, they depend on them. And yet, what does Canada do? It sabotages them. Taxes, regulation.
Let's get into that. The province has launched a petition to trigger a full-blown independence referendum. They need 125,000 signatures and 3,000 have already been collected. Now, before someone says only 3,000, let's remember that political earthquakes don't start at 7.0 on the RTOR scale. They start with rumbling, and that's what's happening now.
Now, at the same time, Saskatchewan is also working on their own referendum. They require 125,000 signatures for their referendum, the Unified Grassroots Petition.
Premier Scott Moe, he's not exactly sprinting to shut this down. In fact, he's openly said he wouldn't oppose a Democratic vote on separation. That's not political cowardice. That's calculated restraint. He sees the storm coming and is refusing to stand in its path. Moe isn't fueling the fire, but he sure as hell isn't putting it out. That alone speaks volumes.
The frustration is boiling over. Could they actually succeed? Short answer, yes.
This petition isn't some flimsy suggestion box idea. Saskatchewan is quietly following the same legal path laid out by the Clarity Act, the same framework Quebec used twice. If a clear majority supports it in a referendum, that's a legitimate, constitutionally grounded route to secession. This is not some back alley scheme. This is legal. This is structured, and it's happening in plain sight.
Canada has something called the Clarity Act, which lays out how a province could legally separate from the country. It wouldn't be easy, but a clear majority vote in a referendum would start the process.
Why now? Because Saskatchewan's political climate is ripe for it. Rural support is growing. The province leans conservative and has had it with Ottawa's policies that seem tailor-made to throttle productivity. Carbon taxes hurt farmers, Pipeline delays hurt exporters, mining bottlenecks hurt communities. In Ottawa, it shrugs and sends another invoice.
Carbon taxes and environmental regulations are crushing farmers and oil producers. Federal equalization payments take money from Alberta and Saskatchewan to prop up provinces like Quebec and Maritimes.
And speaking of Ottawa doing Ottawa things, enter Bill C-5, the project fast-tracking bill that was supposed to streamline development, except in reality, it's being called out for doing the exact opposite. First Nations in Saskatchewan are pushing back hard. They say it's a top-owned mess that ignores treaty rights, plays favorites, and leaves whole communities out of the loop. So instead of uniting Indigenous partners in industry under a productive framework, Ottawa managed to offend everyone in the process.
With global food supply chains in turmoil, having a secure food source inside American borders is a game changer.
Let's talk about uranium. Saskatchewan's uranium sector isn't just a revenue machine, it's a model of Indigenous partnership. Between 45 and 55% of the workforce in that sector is Indigenous. Not symbolic hires, actual careers. There are ownership stakes, procurement rights, and long-term economic ties. That's what real collaboration looks like. But with Ottawa's new rules and sweeping overrides, those partnerships are now under threat. And once again, nobody in Ottawa seems to care.
Alberta and Saskatchewan leave, Canada as we know it falls apart. The federal budget collapses. Ottawa relies heavily on tax revenue from Alberta. Quebec might demand independence.
Premier Moe has been clear about this. Engagement should mean everyone gets a seat at the table, not just the voices Ottawa cherry picks. Saskatchewan doesn't want handouts. It wants cooperation that respects real consultation and real autonomy. Instead, it gets national legislation that skips dialogue entirely and then pretends it's helping.
3,000 signatures, but it's growing every day. And Premier Moe has publicly stated he would not stand in the way of an independence vote.
The frustration isn't coming from nowhere. The province watches as its private projects are strangled by red tape. Then in the same breath, Ottawa tries to fast-track public initiatives that don't include key stakeholders. So which is it? Are we stalling development for environmental justice, or are we bulldozing policy through for political points? Because right now Saskatchewan's getting whiplash and it's losing billions in the process.
But the seeds are there. Canada's internal divisions are growing. America is shifting its economic priorities, and the global order is changing fast.
All of this has pushed Saskatchewan to a place where it's seriously questioning whether staying in Canada is even worth it anymore. Not emotionally, economically, legally, culturally, and the answer seems to be tilting more toward no with every new bill, regulation, and federal shrug.
The polling numbers are pretty stunning. 36% of Albertans want separation. 34% of Saskatchewanians support separation.
This isn't just about politics anymore. Saskatchewan isn't tossing around referendum talk just because it's bored. What's actually happening here is a full-blown identity shift. It's not waving maple flags and singing "Oh Canada." It's looking in the mirror and realizing, wait a minute, this place doesn't feel like Canada anymore. And no, that's not just emotional drama. It's backed by behavior, values, and a very loud internal monologue that says, we don't belong to this dysfunctional club.
If Alberta and Saskatchewan held a referendum and won, they could declare independence. And then, joining the U.S. would actually be the easy part.
This is what happens when a province gets pushed around long enough. People in Saskatchewan aren't walking around thinking of themselves as Canadians first. According to social identity theory, which basically explains how a group identity forms when people feel alienated, they're aligning more with Westerners than Canadians. In their eyes, they're not part of some Ottawa collective anymore. They're part of something separate, something proud, something built on resource development, conservative values, and not needing federal approval for every shovel they put in the ground.
Petition to get the ball rolling. And Canada's, I think, the only democracy that has codified its ability, the provincial ability.
And who can blame them? Let's talk carbon taxes for a second. While politicians in Ottawa debate emissions targets over soy lattes, Saskatchewan's grain producers are getting buried in costs. That's not theory, that's real money, real farms, and real frustration. And pipelines, good luck. Every time Saskatchewan tries to move oil or gas to market, someone in Eastern Canada finds a reason to say no. The result, exports stuck, profits lost, and a province that starts to feel more like an outsider than a partner.
Think about what Alberta and Saskatchewan add to the U.S. Energy dominance. Alberta alone has the third largest oil reserves in the world, behind Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. Add that to the American oil production, the U.S. becomes even more energy independent.
That's why so many people there say with a straight face, we have more in common with Montana than Toronto. And they're not joking. They look south and see states with similar industries, similar values, and this is the important part, freedom to act without begging for federal permission. Meanwhile, Toronto and Ottawa might as well be on another planet where words like energy independence are offensive and farmers are the villains in a climate change horror story.
Moving forward with an independence referendum for 2026. They just lowered the referendum threshold from 640,000 signatures to 177,000, so it's guaranteed to be on the ballot in just months from now.
We're talking potash, uranium, oil, and wheat, not boutique crafts or experimental tech startups, real foundational commodities that are always in demand. And who's buying them? Not Ontario, not Nova Scotia, it's the United States. Saskatchewan's economy is already tied more closely to American markets than to its own country. That's not a fluke. That's a trade relationship that makes the idea of deeper U.S. alignment a lot less hypothetical than people think.
The U.S. Constitution doesn't ban the admission of new states. In fact, it's much easier to add a state than it is to amend the Constitution.
Meanwhile, Ottawa is doing its usual song and dance. Instead of helping Saskatchewan grow, it's proposing genius ideas like, wait for it, putting more tolls on highways. Yes, the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board wants to squeeze drivers harder, not to build Saskatchewan's economy, but to pull profits from it. Forget investing in local industries or long-term growth. Let's just charge people for existing. Brilliant. If you want more truths to be revealed like this, hit subscribe. New episodes drop daily.